In the world of country music, there are legends, and then there are storytellers. And for over half a century, there was no one who could spin a yarn in a 3-minute song quite like Tom T. Hall. He was known simply and affectionately as the Storyteller. His songs weren't just tunes. They were vignettes of American life, populated by grave diggers, lonely old men, and soldiers a world away from home. He wrote about the small details, the quiet moments, and the profound truths hidden in ordinary lives. For decades, he was a comforting, wise, and gentle voice on the radio, a man who seemed to have figured out the secret to a life well lived. He built a world of peace and reflection for himself, a quiet farm in Tennessee, where he wrote, tinkered, and enjoyed the fruits of a long and celebrated career. He seemed to be the one who had made it through the turbulence of the music industry with his soul intact. He was 85 years old, a beloved elder statesman of country music. And then in August of 2021, the story took a shocking and devastating turn. The man who had brought so much understanding and empathy to the world, the man who had written I Love, a simple and beautiful catalog of life's small joys, ended his own life. The news was a quiet shockwave, a tragedy that seemed to come out of nowhere, leaving fans and friends grappling with a question that had no easy answer. Why? How could the man who taught us to find beauty in the everyday decide that his own days were no longer worth living? This is the story of the man behind the stories, a life of incredible highs and a final heartbreaking act that remains largely unexplored. To understand the man who became the Storyteller, you have to travel back in time to the hard-scrabble hills of eastern Kentucky during the Great Depression. Tom T. Hall was born on May 25, 1936, in a log cabin his father built near Tick Ridge, just outside of Olive Hill, Kentucky. This wasn't just a rustic upbringing. It was a life defined by poverty and hardship. His father, Virgil, was a bricklayer and a part-time preacher, a man who, despite the difficult circumstances, filled their small home with music and books. His mother, Della, died from complications of an illness when Tom was just 11, a loss that would profoundly shape his young life. The Kentucky of Tom T. Hall's youth was a place of stark contrasts. It was a land of breathtaking natural beauty, of rolling hills and dense forests. But it was also a place of deep poverty, where survival was a daily struggle. Music was not a luxury. It was a necessity. It was a way to pass the time, to share stories, and to find a little bit of joy in a world that offered very little of it. Young Tom soaked it all in. He learned to play guitar on an instrument his father bought him, and he started writing poems and songs at a young age, a way to process the world around him. His early life was a series of events that could have been plucked from one of his own songs. After his mother's death, his father was unable to care for him and his siblings, and the family was broken up. Tom went to live in a mission home for a time, and later with various relatives. He dropped out of school at the age of 15 to work in a local factory, a path that seemed to be his destiny. But he had a talent and a dream that would not be denied. He formed his first band, the Kentucky Travelers, and they played on a local radio station in Moorhead, Kentucky. It was here that he began to hone his skills as a performer and a songwriter. But his big break, in a way, came from an unexpected source, the U.S. Army. In 1957, at the age of 21, he enlisted. He was stationed in Germany, a world away from the familiar hills of Kentucky. It was during his time in the Army that he began to see the world with a writer's eye. He observed the people around him, the soldiers, the locals, and he started to write songs that told their stories. He later said that the Army taught him discipline and gave him a broader perspective on the world, two things that would be essential to his future success. When he returned to the United States in 1961, he was a changed man. He had a newfound confidence and a portfolio of songs that were unlike anything else being written at the time. He worked as a DJ for a while, a job that allowed him to study the hit songs of the day and figure out what made them work. He sent some of his own songs to a publisher in Nashville, and in 1963 he got his first big break when country singer Jimmy C. Newman had a hit with his song DJ for a Day. The following year he made the move that would change his life forever. He packed his bags and headed to Nashville, the heart of the country music industry. He arrived with just a few dollars in his pocket and a head full of stories. He was a long way from the log cabin on Tick Ridge, but the lessons of his hard-won youth, the keen powers of observation, and the deep well of empathy he had developed would become the cornerstones of a career that would redefine what a country song could be. When Tom T. Hall arrived in Nashville in 1964, he wasn't looking to become a star. He was a songwriter, first and foremost, a humble craftsman who simply wanted to tell his stories. But the sheer originality and power of his songs could not be ignored. He quickly gained a reputation as one of the most gifted and unique writers in town. His songs were different. They weren't the typical tales of love and loss that dominated the country charts. They were character studies, slice-of-life narratives that were filled with specific telling details. His first major success as a songwriter came in 1968 when Jeannie C. Riley recorded his song, Harper Valley PTA. The song, a scathing and witty indictment of small-town hypocrisy, was a phenomenon. It shot to number 1 on both the country and pop charts, a rare feat at the time. It became an anthem of rebellion and a cultural touchstone. The success of Harper Valley PTA made Tom T. Hall a hot commodity in Nashville, but it also pigeonholed him as a writer of novelty songs, a label he was eager to shed. He signed a record deal of his own with Mercury Records and began to release a string of albums that showcased the true depth and breadth of his talent. It was during this period, from the late 1960s through the 1970s, that he earned the nickname the Storyteller. His songs were populated by a cast of characters that felt as real and as vivid as people you knew. There was the philosophical gravedigger in Old Dog's Children and Watermelon Wine, a song based on a real conversation Hall had at a convention in Miami. There was the lonely old man in The Year That Clayton Delaney Died, a poignant tribute to a childhood hero. And there was the sensitive soldier in Salute to a Switchblade, a song that offered a nuanced and humanizing portrait of a soldier in Vietnam. His approach to songwriting was revolutionary. He didn't just write about emotions, he showed them through the actions and words of his characters. He was a master of the small detail, the seemingly insignificant observation that could reveal a whole world of meaning. He once said, "I don't write songs, I find them." He was a journalist in a songwriter's body, a man who was constantly observing the world around him, looking for the stories that needed to be told. One of his most beloved, and perhaps most personal, songs from this era is I Love. The song is a simple and beautiful list of the things that brought him joy. I love little baby ducks, old pickup trucks, slow-moving trains, and rain. It was a radical departure from the angst and drama of so much popular music at the time. It was a song about gratitude, about finding beauty in the simple, everyday things. It was a reflection of the man himself, a man who, despite his success, never lost his connection to the simple pleasures of life. His personal life also flourished during this time. In 1968, he met the love of his life, a songwriter and journalist named Dixie Dean. They were a perfect match, two creative souls who shared a love of music, words, and a quiet rural life. They married and settled on a farm outside of Nashville, a sprawling property they named Fox Hollow. It became their sanctuary, a place where they could escape the pressures of the music industry and focus on their creative pursuits. But even as he was writing songs about the quiet joys of life, Hall was not afraid to tackle more serious and controversial subjects. In 1972, he released the song "The Monkey That Became President," a satirical and pointed critique of the political climate of the time. The song was banned by some radio stations, but it solidified his reputation as a fearless and independent artist. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, he continued to release a string of successful albums and hit singles. He was a consistent and beloved presence on the country music scene. But as the 80s gave way to the 90s, the sound of country music began to change. The slick, pop-influenced sound of new country was in vogue, and there was less room on the radio for the kind of thoughtful, narrative-driven songs that were his specialty. He gradually retreated from the spotlight, content to spend his time at Fox Hollow with Dixie, writing songs, tending to his animals, and pursuing his other passions, which included writing novels and children's books. He had achieved everything he had ever set out to do, and he seemed to be at peace with his place in the world. He was the wise elder statesman, the beloved storyteller who had left an indelible mark on the landscape of American music. And for all intents and purposes, it seemed that the final chapter of his story would be a long and peaceful one. The public persona of Tom T. Hall was one of contentment and quiet wisdom. He was the man who wrote "Old Dog's Children" and "Watermelon Wine," a song that distilled a lifetime of wisdom into a few simple verses. He was the man who found joy in little baby ducks and slow-moving trains. He had a long and happy marriage to his beloved wife, Dixie, and he lived on a beautiful farm that he had built with his own hands. From the outside, his life seemed to be a perfect country song, a testament to the virtues of hard work, humility, and a love of the simple things. But behind this idyllic facade, there was a man who had known deep and profound loss, a man who had struggled with his own private demons. The death of his mother when he was just a boy was a wound that never fully healed. He spoke about it occasionally in interviews, but always with a sense of guardedness, a hint of the deep pain that still lingered. This early trauma instilled in him a sense of melancholy, a lonesome-hearted feeling, as he once described it, that would surface in some of his most poignant songs. His relationship with his father was also complex. While Virgil Hall was the one who introduced him to music and literature, he was also a man who struggled with his own demons, including a battle with alcohol. The instability of his childhood, the feeling of being an outsider, was something that stayed with him throughout his life. It was this sense of otherness that allowed him to see the world with such a keen and empathetic eye, but it also left him with a sense of isolation. In his later years, another shadow fell over his life, the declining health of his wife, Dixie. She was his partner in every sense of the word, his co-writer, his confidant, and his greatest champion. They were inseparable, a team that had weathered the storms of the music industry together. As her health began to fail, he became her primary caregiver. The weight of this responsibility, combined with his own advancing age and health issues, began to take a heavy toll. One rarely discussed but deeply revealing aspect of Hall's character was his almost obsessive need to stay busy. At Fox Hollow, he didn't just write songs, he built fences, repaired equipment, and was constantly engaged in some kind of project. This restless energy, which had served him so well in his career, may have also been a way to keep the darker thoughts at bay. He once said, "I have to stay busy. If I'm not busy, I get to thinking, and that's dangerous." It's a haunting quote in light of what would happen later. The death of Dixie in 2015 was a devastating blow. He had lost his anchor, the person who had been by his side for nearly 50 years. He was now truly alone, adrift in the quiet solitude of Fox Hollow. He became increasingly reclusive, retreating from the public eye and from many of his old friends. Those who did see him during this period described him as a man who was deeply grieving, a man who had lost his spark. He was also struggling with his own health problems. He suffered from COPD and a number of other age-related ailments. He was in constant physical pain, a burden that was compounded by the immense emotional pain of his grief. The man who had once found so much joy in the simple things of life was now trapped in a world of suffering. The COVID-19 pandemic only served to deepen his isolation. The lockdowns and social distancing measures cut him off from the few remaining social connections he had. He was a man who had built his career on observing and connecting with people, and now he was living in a world where that was no longer possible. In the months leading up to his death, there were signs that he was in a deep and profound state of despair. He had reportedly been talking about his own mortality, telling friends that he was ready to go, but his words were largely dismissed as the musings of an old man who was grieving the loss of his wife. No one seemed to grasp the true depth of his despair. The man who had spent his life telling the stories of others was unable or unwilling to tell the story of his own immense pain. And so, in the quiet solitude of his beloved Fox Hollow, he made a decision that would send shockwaves through the world of country music and leave a permanent and heartbreaking question mark at the end of his extraordinary life story. The death of Tom T. Hall by suicide on August 20th, 2021, was a tragedy that was as shocking as it was quiet. The initial reports were sparse, stating only that the 85-year-old country music legend had died at his home in Franklin, Tennessee. The cause of death was not immediately released, and for a time, the narrative was simply that a beloved elder statesman had passed away. But as the details began to emerge, a much darker and more troubling picture came into focus. The official cause of death, as confirmed by the Williamson County Medical Examiner's Office, was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The news was met with a stunned disbelief. This was Tom T. Hall, the storyteller, the man who had written I Love and Old Dogs, Children, and Watermelon Wine. He was supposed to be the one who had it all figured out, the one who had found peace and contentment in a world that was often chaotic and cruel. The idea that he could die in such a violent and desperate act seemed to be a contradiction of everything he represented. The controversy surrounding his death is not one of scandal or malfeasance, but rather a profound and unsettling debate about the nature of depression, grief, and the hidden struggles of old age. The central question that emerged, and one that has still not been fully answered, is how did we all miss it? How could a man who was so beloved, so respected, and so seemingly at peace with the world be suffering in such silence? One side of the debate points to a failure of our collective imagination. We have a tendency to romanticize old age, to see it as a time of quiet reflection and wisdom. We don't like to think about the fact that the elderly can suffer from the same mental health struggles as anyone else. In the case of Tom T. Hall, his public persona as the wise, gentle storyteller may have made it even harder for people to see the signs of his despair. We saw the man we wanted to see, not the man who was actually there. There is also the question of the role that his physical health played in his decision. He was suffering from chronic pain, a condition that can be a major contributing factor to depression and suicide in the elderly. The debate here is a sensitive one. Is it ever possible to understand or even to condone the decision of someone who is suffering from an incurable and debilitating illness to end their own life? This is a question that our society is still grappling with, and Tom T. Hall's story brings it into sharp and painful focus. Another aspect of the controversy is the way in which his death was initially reported. There was a reluctance to use the word suicide, a reflection of the stigma that still surrounds mental illness and self-harm. This reluctance, while perhaps well-intentioned, does a disservice to the truth of his story. By shying away from the difficult reality of his death, we miss an opportunity to have a much-needed conversation about the importance of mental health care for the elderly. The story of Tom T. Hall's death is also a story about the profound and often overlooked impact of grief. He was a man who had lost the love of his life, his partner of nearly 50 years. His suicide was, in many ways, a testament to the depth of his love for Dixie and his inability to imagine a life without her. This raises difficult questions about the nature of love and loss and the limits of human endurance. Ultimately, the controversy surrounding Tom T. Hall's death is not about assigning blame, but about seeking understanding. It is about acknowledging the complexity of the human experience and the fact that even our greatest heroes can suffer in silence. His story is a challenge to all of us to be more attentive, more compassionate, and more willing to have the difficult conversations about the things that we would rather ignore. It is a heartbreaking coda to a life that was dedicated to telling the truth, and it forces us to confront a truth that is as uncomfortable as it is undeniable. That the stories we tell ourselves about the people we admire are often incomplete, and that the reality of their lives can be far more complex and tragic than we could ever imagine. The death of Tom T. Hall left a void in the world of country music that will never be filled. He was more than just a singer and a songwriter. He was a cultural institution, a man who had chronicled the lives of ordinary Americans with an extraordinary degree of empathy and grace. The consequences of his life and his tragic death are still unfolding, but it is clear that his impact will be a lasting one. His most significant contribution, and the one for which he will be best remembered, is his elevation of the country song to a form of literature. Before Tom T. Hall, the country song was often a simple, straightforward expression of emotion. He showed that it could be something more. He used the 3-minute song format to create complex characters, to tell intricate stories, and to explore the profound truths of the human condition. He was a poet of the common man, a man who found beauty and meaning in the most unlikely of places. His influence can be seen in the work of generations of songwriters who have followed in his footsteps. Artists like Jason Isbell, Sturgill Simpson, and Chris Stapleton, who are known for their literate, narrative-driven songwriting, all owe a debt to Tom T. Hall. He paved the way for a more intelligent and introspective form of country music, one that is not afraid to tackle complex themes and to tell stories that are both specific and universal. His life also serves as a powerful testament to the importance of authenticity. In an industry that is often driven by image and artifice, Tom T. Hall was always unapologetically himself. He was the same man on stage as he was off, a humble, down-to-earth man who never forgot where he came from. He showed that it was possible to be a successful artist without sacrificing your integrity, a lesson that is more relevant today than ever before. But the story of his life is not just about his artistic achievements. It is also about his humanity. He was a man who lived with a deep sense of compassion, a man who was always willing to lend a listening ear and a helping hand. He was a devoted husband, a loyal friend, and a mentor to many young artists. His kindness and generosity were as much a part of his legacy as his music. The tragic circumstances of his death also have a profound and lasting significance. His suicide was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that the struggles of mental illness and grief do not discriminate. They can affect anyone, regardless of their age, their success, or their public persona. His story has helped to open up a conversation about the importance of mental health care for the elderly, a topic that has too often been ignored. In the end, the historical significance of Tom T. Hall is twofold. He was a master storyteller who forever changed the landscape of country music, and he was a complex and deeply human individual whose life and death force us to confront some of the most difficult and important questions of our time. He taught us to look for the stories in the world around us, to listen with an open heart, and to find the beauty in the everyday. And in his tragic final act, he left us with one last heartbreaking story, a story that reminds us of the fragility of the human spirit and the importance of compassion, understanding, and hope. He was the storyteller, and his story in all its beauty and all its pain will be told for generations to come. In the quiet aftermath of a life so richly lived and so tragically ended, we are left with the echo of his voice and the power of his words. Tom T. Hall's story did not end in the way any of us would have written it. The man who crafted so many perfect narratives, so many tales of quiet dignity and gentle wisdom, left his own story with a final jarring note of despair. It's a difficult and uncomfortable truth to reconcile with the man we thought we knew, the gentle soul of Fox Hollow. But perhaps the greatest tribute we can pay to the storyteller is to resist the urge to simplify his ending, to smooth over the rough edges of his final chapter. His life was a testament to the power of seeing the world in all its complexity, of finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, the light in the shadows. His death, in its own heartbreaking way, was a part of that story. It was a story of immense love and profound grief of a man who gave so much empathy to the world that perhaps there was not enough left for himself. We can remember him for Harper Valley PTA and its feisty defiance. We can remember him for the simple, profound gratitude of I love. We can remember him for the hard-won wisdom of Old Dog's Children and Watermelon Wine. These songs are his true monument, a legacy of truth and beauty that will endure. But we must also remember the silence that followed the music, the private pain that a public figure could no longer bear. Tom T. Hall's life teaches us that everyone has a story, and that no story is as simple as it seems from the outside. His death reminds us to listen more closely, to love more fiercely, and to be a little kinder to the people we meet, for we never truly know the battles they are fighting. He was the storyteller, and his greatest, most enduring story is the one that prompts us to be better story listeners in the lives of those around us. And that's all for today's video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe so you'll always be in the loop. Thanks for watching,